Hi, this is Changing the Narrative, and this is going to be our first video that is aimed at changing the narrative in the Idaho murders case. And the suspect, Brian Kohberger, is the main focus of this. Please recognize that anything I say in this video is speculation and does not necessarily say that someone is guilty until they're proven guilty in a court of law. This is just for entertainment purposes, and I'm not an expert in any way on any of this. But I think I have a lot of insights and a lot of new stuff that a lot of people haven't noticed or haven't found, and a few things that I've put together in different ways that I think will be interesting for you to watch. So please take all that into account and watch the video. Thanks. Hello, everybody. We are going to look at the Kohberger case today, and I am going to look at it from the perspective that maybe the police have got it right, and maybe Kohberger did do it, and look at the evidence and see if it makes a good case. I think it does. And we're going to look through a whole load of stuff that I've gathered over the whole time since the murders happened. I was there right at the beginning. There was some information that kind of got lost in all of the social media around this, and there's also some information that people who don't believe Kohberger did it, they flame people that say anything backing up the police or backing up the idea that Kohberger did it. So I'm going to look at some of those things without anyone able to flame me, because this is just a video and they can't interrupt, and hopefully the point will get across that way. So let's start looking at this. Now, anyone who doesn't know, the Kohberger case is all about the Idaho 4 who were murdered in 1122 King Road. There were 4 students, 3 girls and 1 boy. So it's Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan. And one of the reasons I put that music on at the beginning is because it's just a heartbreaking incident. And I feel so bad for the families, and just don't know how they're going on, really, given what's happened to their children. So I want everybody to bear that in mind. Someone did this, okay? You may not think it's Kohberger, but someone definitely did this. And for anyone else to have done this, there's a lot of issues that I think with that narrative don't make sense. This is why I want to change the narrative to looking at the possibility that Kohberger did do this. Now, one of the first things I'm going to look at is this timeline. Now, I got this timeline from someone, right, fairly early on, not immediately, obviously, but fairly early on, and it was so good. But I only got certain screenshots of it, so there is some missing. If anyone knows where this came from and can let me know, then I would love to revisit that website and restart some of this work, because it's got so much detail in it and it's so useful. So some of the things that you have to remember are the history of Brian Kohberger and why the police think he did it, and all the context around that. Okay, so some of the stuff in here is really useful, I think, for looking at that. Now, I don't know that Kohberger did it, of course, and he's not guilty until proven in a court of law. And you must bear that in mind throughout this whole video. But I just want to show you some of the stuff that supports that case, which maybe you don't know. Okay. So there's a number of examples of Brian Kohberger through the years of being strange with women. That's the first thing. There's also a number of cases through the years of him studying stuff that would help him in committing this murder. Now, I'm not saying that everybody that studies these subjects is a murderer, but I'm just thinking if you can look at it through that lens and think about how what he studied might have helped him commit the murders. So at first he does a lot of psychology. You can see here He's also on Tinder, notice, so social media plays a big part in his life. So just remember that familiarity with social media and psychology, that goes right back, okay? He also works as a security guard at a school, so he knows a lot about how physical security works and how security guards watch what goes on and so on. So that's a lot of stuff that could help him with this murder if he is indeed the perp. Now there are coincidences in his life which may or may not be relevant to this case, but there are a few deaths around him. This one here, there was a student who was found deceased. I'm not saying he did it, I'm just saying that there are some coincidences around where he is at the time. So he graduated from DeSales University in 2022. So that is just a fact that he did, and he did study psychology, and he also studied criminology as well. So Kaylee Gonsalves, I always pronounce that wrong, because at the beginning everyone called it Goncalves, so sometimes I trip up and go back to that. So if I do that, I'm sorry. So she starts her job at Extreme Networks as an intern in that summer. Now, remember, Extreme Networks is a tech company. Remember that Brian has a tech background, and we'll talk about that later on, where that all comes in. So that may be something that connects them. We're not sure yet, but Extreme Networks is all about networking and security in tech, and that is an area that Brian is very interested in. So it might not connect them, it may connect. So Brian moves into those apartments that we've heard about so much, very close to Washington, to the University of Washington, in his apartment. So some victims begin their lease on June the 5th here. So they all, or some of them, move into the property or start their lease around that date. Almost the same, well, a few weeks later, Brian Kohberger opens a cell phone account. Now, notice this says a cell phone account. There may be more than one cell phone account here. Don't forget that. With AT&T in his own name, registered to his Pennsylvania address. Okay, we've got that in the PCA. So there's a number of cases where the police are called to the house, and we know that the relevance of that might be a number of things. So first of all, it's a noisy house, so people might ignore it if people were screaming and so on like that. So that might be relevant. But also lots of people go in and out of that house all the time. It's very clear from the videos that you see when the officers visit the house. Sometimes the people that live there are not even in the house at the time, and there's a party going on and things like that. So we've got instances where Kohberger's phone is utilizing these cellular resources that provide coverage to the King Road residence. Now, we don't know that he's actually at the King Road residence at that point. That's just a piece of the puzzle, and that's in the PCA. I'm sure they've got other information backing that up. I'm sure there are like cameras, maybe Ring cameras or maybe security cameras or what have you, backing that up. In the PCA, that's one of the things they mention, but they don't have to mention everything in a PCA. Just remember, a PCA is basically an affidavit, a sworn document that gives the minimum probable cause to charge somebody with a murder or charge somebody with an offense, in this case, murder. And it doesn't have to have everything in it, okay? So the PCA, just think of that as the bottom, the minimum that the police have to tell us, basically. So the background here is Farm Road and Pullman Highway is a place where, you know, Kohberger has been pulled over in his white Elantra with this Pennsylvania plate. So I think it's very clear that he had this white Elantra. I don't think anyone's denying that. And it was a 2015 model with this plate, this Pennsylvania plate on this date. Now, I want you to open your mind to the possibility that on the night of the actual murders, he may have used another Hyundai Elantra. He may have used more than one. And he also, I think, swapped out the plates. So the other Hyundai Elantra had his plate on the, I can't remember if it's the front or the back. I know it doesn't have it on one or the other. I think it might be he's only got it on the back, or it might only have it on the front. I can't remember. Pennsylvania says you can have a plate only on one of the front or the back. So I think he swapped his Elantra with another Elantra and put his plates on the other Elantra. I think that's my guess. It explains a few things, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so the first day of classes was August 23rd, and he was the TA, which is a teaching assistant, and lots and lots of information tells us that he has a big superiority complex. He likes to make out as if he knows more than anybody else in the room. This goes back to his youth, his teenage years. But especially in this criminology class, he acts as if he knows everything. And he also wrote a questionnaire for criminals, basically asking criminals how they got away with different crimes and things like their psychological issues around the crime. So what made them think this and what made them do that, and what was their motivation and that kind of thing. We'll talk about that later on as we get into it. But remember that this kind of criminology class and these kind of exercises to connect with criminals and find out how they got away with things, that may be relevant, I think. I honestly believe that I think Brian planned this whole crime really carefully, and I think he was thinking constantly about all the ways that he could make it possible to keep reasonable doubt in the minds of a jury, and even in the police's mind, by making so many variables that it didn't seem possible that he could have done it, kind of thing. That's what I believe. So one of the factors into that, I think, is all this information he got from all these criminals about how they got away with murders or how they got away with different crimes and what they would do differently next time so that they didn't get caught and that kind of thing. So I think a lot of that helped educate him in how to get away with it or how to create a scenario where it was really difficult to prove that he had done what he had done. I think he's an extremely clever guy. I don't think anyone should underestimate him. And I'll go through as I go along some of the evidence to why I think that is true. Okay, so we have a noise complaint. We have a number of noise complaints. It's very obvious that this is a party atmosphere where there's lots of noise going on. The house is open to anyone that wants to come in and go out at all times, kind of thing. Even the back door, the sliding door, is known to be open a lot, and people just kind of walk in and walk out. And of course, that's relevant because, according to the police, he at least left by the sliding doors, it seems, from the PCA, but he possibly could have got in through the sliding doors too. We don't actually know that, but it kind of sounds like he did. Okay, so there's another incident that you can't really see very well on here, but let's see if I can move this in a bit. There we go. So on September the 12th, this is like less than a couple of months, or just a couple of months before the murders, there was a man threatening a student or students with a knife very close to the University of Idaho. He appeared to be 18 to 22 years old in all black, and blah, blah, blah. Now, they say that this man has yet to be identified. I'm guessing this is not Brian. It's somebody else, but it may be. One of the reasons I say that is because they thought it was 18 to 22 years old. I think Brian looks older than that, but maybe, who knows? So it may be a red herring, that one, I'm not sure. So let's go to another part of the timeline. So we've talked about the knife complaint there. So Vandal Alert sent out advising students to keep their doors locked and stay inside on that day because of this knife issue. So September the 15th, a man was threatening students with a knife and he was identified, cooperating with police. No charges have been filed. Okay, so I'm guessing that is not Brian, but it may be, and it's not mentioned in the PCA. I think it would be mentioned in the PCA if that was him. I don't know. I'm just guessing. Okay. So we've got a number, and we'll talk about this later, but we've got a number of cases where Kohberger was stopped by the police and for minor issues, infractions and stuff. Now, this on its own sounds like it's just, he's got bad luck with the police and he gets stopped a lot. But I think when you put it all together, I think he may have been stalking Kaylee when you see the other evidence later on. I think he must have been stalking Kaylee. And so the police have this kind of way of making it clear that if someone is bothering someone or stalking someone, they can kind of a little bit harass them a little bit. So they can stop them a lot. And if there's anything they're doing wrong, like if they've got no seatbelt on, normally no one's going to get stopped for having no seatbelt on or definitely not get a ticket. But the police will just do that little bit more for anyone that's been reported as harassing someone. So I'm guessing the police knew that he was a stalker, harassing Kaylee, and that's why they're giving him a hard time and they keep stopping him. That's just my guess. That's just complete speculation. I think that's possible. Okay, so he applies for an internship with the Pullman Police Department in the fall of 2022. We're not exactly sure when. However, I think that's very relevant. He wanted to be a forensic person in the Pullman Police Department, intern. Now, to do that, first of all, it shows that he's interested in that field, the police department. Obviously, he's working in that field too. But the second thing is the forensic side. I think he wanted to be able to commit this perfect murder. I think he wanted the insights that he would gain from the forensics department of that sheriff's office by working in that area. And sorry, it may be that sheriff's office or the Pullman Police Department. I'm not sure which one. Sorry, it's the Pullman Police Department. Sorry. So he applied for the internship in the Pullman Police Department. And I think that is where he wanted to be this forensics person. So he wanted to gain that forensics insight, I think, to help him with his crime, to help him know what to look for and how to get access to information and stuff. I think he was planning this crime a long time before it happened. And there's a lot of speculation there. A lot of my speculation is kind of assuming that Kaylee was on OnlyFans, and Brian may have seen her on OnlyFans when he was in Pennsylvania, and he moved specifically here to Moscow, Idaho, or to Pullman, Washington, so that he could be close to Kaylee and find her and harass her or stalk her and that kind of thing. This is just all speculation, but that is my guess. So I think he's planned this a long time in advance. That's my guess. I think ideally he would have liked to have had a relationship with Kaylee rather than stalking her and rather than killing her, I think. A bit like Elliot Rodgers, which we'll talk about Elliot Rodgers later, but Kohberger admired Elliot Rodgers, I believe, in a lot of ways. And the reason I believe that is there's a number of pieces of evidence to show that, one of which is the items that they took from Kohberger's apartments. Allegedly, he was on one of the pages of the Elliot Rodgers manifesto and he circled or highlighted some of the page. And that is a rumor, except it's kind of documented in the sheet from the police that he was highlighting something on page, I think it's 118, I might be wrong. And that is a page where it particularly gets nasty about women and threatening them with death pretty much. So Elliot Rodgers, if you don't know, is a guy who was very frustrated. They call them incels. He was an incel who involuntarily was celibate because no woman would have sex with him and he couldn't maintain any kind of relationship with any girl or woman got very frustrated, lived in California, surrounded by all these beautiful students, and they were all having sex. He felt they were all having sex, and he was the only one that wasn't, pretty much. And he got more and more angry with that. And his manifesto is really interesting to read if you're trying to understand this case, I think. I really believe that Brian Kohberger had studied a lot of serial killers, a lot of killers. Elliot Rogers ended up killing a number of kind of Greek life cheerleader type students, mainly girls, I think, a few boys, in a kind of mass murder, mass shooting. And his manifesto kind of is an explanation of why, or where his brain was and why he targeted those particular group of students. So if you read that, and if you think that Kohberger was reading that material just before this murders happened, it for me, it adds a little bit more weight to the fact that it might have been Kohberger that did it, and also to explain why he did it. So the reason that Elliot Rogers did it was because these beautiful students were having such a great life, and he was kind of jealous and kind of angry that he wasn't part of it. Well, if you extend that to Kohberger, it seems like Kohberger was kind of looking in from the outside on all these parties and these beautiful people living in this house, wanted to have sex, I'm guessing, with Kaylee. I think he saw her on OnlyFans. That's my guess. I'm guessing he approached her, she turned him down, and, when that happened, it was kind of, her fate was sealed, really, in Kohberger's mind, I think. So that's just my guess. I don't know any of this. So we've got lots of times when Kohberger is pulled over anyway. So Kaylee has kind of moved out of 1122 King Road. She's staying with her family. Her family have stated that publicly. And she buys herself a new car, a Range Rover, and she wants to go back to Moscow, just to see people for a weekend. It's a big weekend. There's a Pi Phi party, which is one of these Greek life sorority type parties, or maybe it's fraternity. No, I think that's a sorority. I can't remember. To show off her car to her friends, to Maddie. Maddie and Kaylee have been best friends forever, like since they were about 12 years old or something. So she really wanted to go back and see them, recognizing that after this weekend, probably she's not going to see them for some time. She's probably going to move to this new job location. She's been working on this job kind of remotely and over the summer, I think, as an intern. But now she's going to be actually starting the job, I think, in Texas, from what the family said. It's a little bit unclear, but it seems like that's the case. So I think she goes back unexpectedly to Moscow for that weekend. So I'm guessing that Kohberger would not know that she'd gone back. I think she went to her parents because she was fed up with getting stalked. That's my guess, reading between the lines. Came back to the house to show off her car and to have a party weekend. So this weekend, November the 11th, was kind of the start of it all, the Friday. There was a WSU Parents Weekend Day, day one then. There was a Veterans Appreciation Dinner. There was a WSU Parents Weekend Day 2 on Saturday. So some of this is in, Washington State University, and some of this is in Idaho. So in Idaho, in Moscow, there was also some stuff going on Friday. I forget the exact information that was going on, of what was going on, but I think there was a party on Friday night. On Saturday, Kaylee takes all those photos that you've probably seen everywhere of all the roommates climbing all over each other and smiling and looking really happy. And she posted things like, "One lucky girl to be surrounded by these people every day." And at 9:00 that morning, there were all kinds of events, because there's a big football match on the Saturday evening. So that whole day is kind of events for fun at Moscow, at Idaho University of Idaho. So Vandal Jacks is like lumberjack chopping, crosscut saw, chainsaw events, axe throwing, all kinds of stuff going on, caber toss, all that kind of thing. So there's a few things I don't think are very relevant. There's things like Maddie paying for a coffee to Kaylee and Ethan paying Kaylee for a coffee and stuff like that. Don't think that that's really very relevant. So there's a Washington State versus Arizona State home game that day. Don't think that's very relevant to this case unless there's something I'm missing. Kaylee calls her mum after sending some pictures and telling her how much fun she's having, and she went to the P Beta Phi party the night before. So that's kind of that one. Let's look at the next one. So this is the one. So if I go back to the other one, so this is kind of up to 2:30 that day, and I couldn't find the next day. So the next timeline screenshot like this. So I've only got after the murders here. So this is like 4 o'clock onwards, which is kind of almost exactly when the murders happened, we think, and then onwards. This is all I've got. So if anyone knows where this timeline came from and how I can get another go at that information, because it's got so much stuff. It's got all the court documents, the details, the points, the house photos, the diagrams. It's got so much stuff in it, and I've missed out on all of that stuff. So if anyone knows, I'd love to talk to you. So anyway, at 4 a.m., it's thought that all the occupants were home and all were asleep except maybe Xana, because she was playing on TikTok and about to get a DoorDash potentially, we think. We're not sure. So everybody was at least in their rooms at this time. Investigators believe the homicides began around 4 a.m. We actually think now it's 4:07 a.m. I think this is a little bit old, this details here. So Xana received a DoorDash delivery at around 4 a.m. and we've got the Linda Lane footage, the video and the audio from Linda Lane 1330, which kind of says that DoorDash seemed to arrive around 4, but they didn't actually open the door until about 4:04, 4:05, something like that. So Dylan was asleep in her second floor bedroom. So at first we were told she was in the first floor, but she was not. She was in the second floor bedroom at the beginning. She may have moved down to the first floor. Again, we're not clear on that. But the PCA, the police affidavit says at least initially she was in the second floor. And she was woken by what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog upstairs in the third floor bedrooms. Now, my guess, this is personally my guess, is that I think Kaylee and Maddie were already dead at that point. I think they had actually been killed a little bit earlier than this, and I can give you my reasons later. So I think the police know that noise that she heard upstairs was actually the perp, which I think was possibly Kohberger, fighting with Ethan, where Ethan was trying to stop the perp and they had a scuffle. Now, the reason I think that is because I think what happened is the perp left his knife sheath, under Maddie's body. And I think he went back to get it. And as he went up the stairs to try and get it, I think Ethan interrupted him. And that's when the scuffle happened. That's my guess. And we'll explain later on why I think that. So I don't think it was Kaylee playing with her dog. I think it was Ethan and the perp struggling with each other. That's my guess. Okay, so around this time, we know that suspect vehicle 1 enters the area for the 4th time, and we'll talk later on about the number of times that vehicle came in. So when we say suspect vehicle 1 in the PCA, I think it's very clear because they've labeled it 1 that there must be a 2 as well. Okay, and my guess is the police know full well that this suspect vehicle number 1 the only reason they're calling it the suspect's vehicle is because it was in the area at the time, and it had one tag on, either the front or the back, I forget which one, with Brian Kohberger's tag on it, but it wasn't his car, right? Because it was a different shape, and there's a few things different about the car. We'll talk about that later. So around this time, this car, parked close to King Road and it went backwards and forwards a couple of times, and then he stops, I think, and goes into the house. So I think where Dylan thought that she'd heard this noise at 4, I think she'd heard it at 4:05. So we'll give her a bit of slack on that. I think it was at 4:05 she heard this scuffle upstairs with Ethan and the perp, potentially. This is just my guess. So Dylan opens her door at about 4:12. Here's what she thinks is Kaylee saying something to the effect of, "There's someone here." But the police have made it clear in the PCA they believe that was Xana, not Kaylee. And the reason I think they say that is because they think that Kaylee was already dead at that point, and it was Xana who was still awake on her TikTok. Now, whether that is actually Xana on her TikTok or if it's the perp on the TikTok, somebody is on the TikTok app and someone posts something, and we'll talk about later on what that says. It says something about, "Don't forget the foundation in the bath." And that is a very cryptic message, and it's a cryptic message that's very similar to some other cryptic messages that I think were posted by the perp, and I think that perp is Brian Kohberger. So we'll talk about why that is, and why I think that post was from the perp, who I think is Brian Kohberger. That's my guess. Okay. So at 4:13, Dylan opens her door, and here's what she thinks is crying coming from Xana's room. I'm sure that was what it was, crying. I mean, I can't imagine. And a male's voice says something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Now, that is the most psychotic thing I can imagine a killer saying to his victim. And I can only think that he was kind of enjoying himself saying something like that. It's cruel and evil and terrible. But I'm pretty sure that was the perp saying that. Unfortunately, Dylan appears not to have realized that was the perp. So, yeah, very sad. That gets me at a level I can't explain. So there's a camera that's kind of across from Xana's room, about a few hundred feet, maybe, no, not even a few hundred feet. I think it's about 100 feet. And it picks up some noises at this time. Now, some of it is a dog barking. Some of it is some distorted audio that sounds like voices or a whimper and a thud. So somewhere around then, we think Xana was killed at least. We think probably, I personally think Ethan was killed before Xana. And we'll talk about why I think that, where I think he was killed, given all this evidence. Okay, so at 4:18, Dylan opens her door a third time and sees a figure clad in black walking towards her. Now, this is the bushy eyebrows scenario. So she saw a guy that she thought was at least 5'10". It's difficult for her to tell from her vantage point because there were 2 steps between her and him in that house, just so you know. So he would have looked taller than he probably was. So she said he's at least 5'10", but she doesn't know how tall. So I think that is a pretty good description of Kohberger. She said something like he's athletic, but he's not muscular, or something like that. Very good description with bushy eyebrows. I mean, I'm sure they got her to do a lineup and say, "Do you recognize this guy as the person?" And I'm assuming she said yes, otherwise they wouldn't have got permission to charge him, I think. So that's just my guess. Okay, so this same suspect, vehicle 1, is seen departing the King Road residence at around 4:20 at high rate of speed. And then it travels southbound on Willenta Drive. They say likely exiting the neighborhood at... How do I get down there? Let's see if I can get this up here. Hang on a sec. Nope. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. So here we go. Suspect vehicle 1 travels down, will enter drive, likely exiting the neighborhood at Palusa River Drive and Conestoga Drive. Now, I think it does exit the neighborhood at that junction, but I think it does that a lot later than now. And I'll explain why I think that later. But I believe there's another car and another truck involved here, at least. And actually, I also think there's an e-bike, just so you know. Yes, you're going to think I'm crazy. So investigators believe the homicides are over around 4:25. So then we know that Kohberger's phone starts up just after this at 4:48. It's kind of south of Moscow and heads further south and then goes a little bit west and then north and goes back home. So that is pretty well defined. I don't think anyone's arguing that was Kohberger's phone and he was in those locations at this particular time. So we're talking about 4:48 onwards. So remember, his phone went off earlier, and we don't have that on this timeline, but his phone went off at around 2:49, I think, a.m. As he was leaving where he lives, kind of leaving his apartments. So he definitely went from there to, this kind of Highway 95 trip. But between those two places, we don't know where he was because we don't have his phone on at that point. It's either in airplane mode or it's off completely. So we don't have proof, but we do know that he went from one place to the other and somewhere in between for a couple of, for 2 hours, I guess that is, right? So it's, at least we know that much. So we see suspect vehicle 1 again in Pullman and then Johnson Road and then Bishop Boulevard. Now, they're saying suspect vehicle number 1, I think just because it has the same plate, the tag ID. It may not be actually the same vehicle. It may just be the same plate, and just bear that in mind. And I know I sound crazy, and I know that is kind of hard to take on. Okay, so some of the things I want to put in context about this whole thing is the problems that Kohberger had in his life. So this is a post that we pretty much know is from Kohberger. This picture looks like him anyway, but a number of people have traced this back to Kohberger's ID on Reddit and so on from this time period. And this is quite a long time ago. This is when he was a lot younger, I think. So he talks about having depersonalization. So this is a mental health condition where you feel like you are not part of the world. You feel kind of separate from the world. You don't feel part of the world, and so on. And he describes making simple human interactions as if he's playing a role-playing game, such as Oblivion. So he feels very separate from the world, as if he's just playing a game, on a computer. I can see what's going on. I'm slightly into it, but I can pause the game and focus on my real life. So he feels very separate. He feels very not part of humanity, really. In this case, my life is the game, and my old self can be reached by pausing the game. But how? I often think of things that humans do, things I have done my whole life. I feel like an organic sack of meat. Can you imagine an organic sack of meat? So he feels like, he's not really a person in its whole state. He doesn't feel like he has feelings or self-worth or any of that. And he's starting to view everyone as a sack of meat, as an organic sack of meat. Well, if you think of that mindset where you just see everyone as an organic sack of meat, perhaps that makes it easier to kill someone. If you think of them as an organic sack of meat, you don't have any relationship with them, you don't relate to them in any way, you feel isolated from humanity. Maybe that is part of this. Now, he doesn't know it seems, at this time. This is in 2011. He doesn't know it at this time, Remember, this is July the 4th, 2011 too. So this is the day when most people are enjoying being with their families and connecting with other people and really celebrating the connections they have. And this is the day when he's posting this. So that's how isolated he felt. So everything he's ever done makes no sense. So to me, he doesn't know this at the time, I think, but to me, I think he's starting to feel schizophrenic. And schizophrenia usually hits around the age of 18, 19, something like that. And this is just my guess. I don't know. I am not a doctor. I cannot, say that he definitely has schizophrenia, but there's a lot of clues along the way that point to that. Visual snow, which is the Reddit that he's talking to here. If you see here, it says those with visual snow. Visual snow is a condition where your eyesight is kind of, I don't know what the word is, but you see snow around your eye, your vision, so you can't see properly. And it makes you feel even more not part of the world. And it's often it's a sign of schizophrenia. It's not always, but often it is. So there's a number of things around Kohberger that make me think he might have schizophrenia or something like it. So this isolation and depersonalization, this feeling of lack of connection, the idea of humans just being sacks of meat kind of thing. I can't connect, he says. I view everything as if I was playing Oblivion, pointless and full of nothing, out of reality. He feels nothing. He feels pointless. He feels his life is pointless. He's moving out of his house. My last holidays were already lived, but where was I? So he doesn't even, the holidays don't mean anything to him. As my family group hugs and celebrates, I am stuck in this void of nothing, feeling completely no emotion. Now, this all as well could be not schizophrenia. It could be something caused by drugs that he's taken. We have proof that he had a history of drug taking. Some of this can be because of drug taking, but also schizophrenia can also be induced by drug taking. So we know he has a history of drug taking, and we know there's been a few incidents around that too. But basically, he feels no connection to his family. He feels like there is dirt inside of his head and his mind. Now, that again is something schizophrenics say a lot. They say they feel dirty inside. They feel they've got dirt inside their head. He feels dizzy and confused. Again, a lot of schizophrenics feel like that. No self-worth. Again, a lot of schizophrenics feel like that too. He says he's intelligent, but he feels the opposite. I say things I don't mean. And again, schizophrenia can make you say things that you don't mean. Other mental illnesses can as well. So I wonder if that is what we're talking about here. The last holiday in my house, the house I grew up in, the house I once contributed to, the house I once felt at home in, is past. As I hug my family, I look into their faces, I see nothing. It's like I'm looking at a video game, but less. Can you imagine being less connected to your family than a video game? I can't imagine. I feel less than mentally damaged. It is like I have severe brain damage. Now, he's saying himself that he feels like he has severe brain damage. I'm stuck in the depths of my mind where I have to constantly battle my demons. So constantly battling his demons makes it sound to me like he has, maybe voices or maybe just urges telling him to do things he should not do. So I'm guessing he has to fight those and make sure he doesn't do something that's really bad. And he's also wondering if he's fake. So that's, he's feeling pretty bad here. I feel myself slipping away. I'm guessing that he's starting to feel a little bit suicidal here because he's got no self-worth and no connections and so on. This is just guesswork, but he sounds pretty desperate anyway. I hear screams faintly, but I constantly battle away from it. So when he says I hear screams faintly, that can be those hallucinations that you get with schizophrenia or mental illness, or it could just be, I don't know, he's just kind of hearing things in inside of him, I think. What if I let go? Where would I be? So he's fighting this whole thing, but what if he just doesn't bother and he just lets go because it's tiring? You can imagine how much energy this takes to battle against your demons and battle away from all this screaming that goes on inside him and so on. Would I ever come back to reality? So he feels like if he gives up, he might never come back. I try to remember where I originated from, but I can't. I barely remember my childhood. I often fear being 80 years old alone and having faint memories of my parents. So in some ways, this guy sounds suicidal, I think. He's definitely not quite there yet, but he's feeling very desperate and he's thinking that he doesn't really want to live to 80 years old, I think. So, bear this in mind that this was years before the actual murders and so on. So if he was already feeling like this, maybe, 13 years later, he's had enough and he can't handle it anymore and he really does want to die. And this is, these murders and so on, maybe he thought he would end up dead through the death penalty or something similar, or he'd just commit suicide after the murders. I don't know. I'm just guessing that some of this is a factor if he is indeed the perp. He thinks about his father, what a good man he is, how he treats him like dirt because I have this condition. Now, at this point, he's talking about the condition of visual snow, I think. But I don't think he realizes that he's actually describing more than just visual snow. He's talking about, to me, schizophrenia or at least some kind of mental illness, I think. And he says, I can't take it. So he feels guilty about how he treats his father because he's such a good man, but he feels like he can't help himself. He spirals out of control. He loses himself in the void. I can't let it all go, All of these regrets I picture for my future self. It's almost like the longer he lives, the more regrets he has and the more burden of how guilty he feels, really. All these thoughts of remorse. And, to me, reading all this sounds like a schizophrenic person trying to deal with stuff that a lot of it he hasn't got control over. I got this when I was in my stage of discovery. So now I look in the mirror and I see this sickly, tired, useless, and stupid man in the mirror. He is a complete disgrace. He doesn't even deserve to live. And again, there's that hint at some kind of suicidal tendencies, maybe. He obviously doesn't think much of himself. He thinks he's stupid and useless and complete disgrace. It's very sad, very, very sad. I would wander alone at 2 a.m. So 2 a.m. again, this is kind of when he did the murders, right? 2:45 a.m. If he did that, he left his apartment at around 2:45 a.m. So that's kind of significant that he tends to be awake at night. Now, again, with mental illness, schizophrenia and bipolar especially, people are often up late at night if they're not on their meds, because their brain just won't go to sleep. They just can't stop thinking. He felt everything was so generic, nowhere felt like home. I saw things that were not there, a different reality. So again, he's seeing things. Again, that sounds like mental illness, either schizophrenia or bipolar or something like that. I feel eerie and alone. I died during those nights. There's a feeling of not being here, really, not really existing. I felt like a criminal, but where was my record? So at this point in time, it sounds like he doesn't actually have a criminal record, but he just feels really bad about being who he is. Okay. So he's got the guilt. He really feels guilty here. I can't talk about without flinching now. I used to be this healthy blonde-haired boy with blue eyes, and in a few years I have darker hair and darker eyes. Now, this you should take into context of some of his school friends at this time said that he made this big change in personality. So one minute he seemed fine and normal Brian, and then suddenly he just seemed like a completely different person. He looked different, he sounded different, he acted different. To me, this is when schizophrenia hit him. That's just, for me, what I believe. Schizophrenia tends to hit around 18 or 19 and tends to make that person into a completely different person, different personality. The pain and depression won't leave. Being me is this horrible disease that I was given. I think of this as I succumb to sleep, but I see large intensity of black, yellow, white fuzz. So this black, yellow, white fuzz is the visual snow, I think. So that's what he's talking about. Let's just see if we can go a little bit further down here. Yeah, we can. Let's just see the last bit because that's quite important. Let's just go across here. There we go. So the pain and depression won't leave. Being me is this horrible disease. I've got this large intensity of black, yellow, white fuzz. It makes my mind fizzle and I can barely keep in the bounds of reality. It is as if the ringing in my ears and the fuzz in my vision is simply all of the demons in my head mocking me. I fall asleep, but I wake up quickly to bloody screams. Is any of this here? Am I brain damaged? No. Then why am I like this? I have these thoughts all in my head. I search for someone to relate to me. Everyone looks down upon me. No one can relate. As I try to read, suddenly my eyes look right through the words. When I look up, I see blue dots near the center of my vision. When I feel slightly calm, it gets hard to breathe and I see bright dots in my vision. Nothing I do is enjoyable. This poor guy, I mean, if he did these murders, that is a terrible, terrible thing. But it's a shame that someone didn't notice this earlier and help him. I know he did go to some kind of therapy and he did get some kind of help earlier on, but it's a shame that, it didn't really help him. And, it seems like there were lots of signs that could have stopped this whole thing from happening. And that's terribly sad. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. So this is another piece that adds to that. His aunt was interviewed by The Sun, and she basically said she thinks he might try to kill himself if he gets life behind bars or obviously the death penalty, I would guess even more so. Notice here that she had flown Kohberger and his family out to Las Vegas multiple times in the past, and she described him as a shy and troubled teenager. So first of all, she thinks he might kill himself. So I think she knows he's got these tendencies, these depressive tendencies, but also she thinks of him as a shy and troubled teenager. Please remember for later this whole thing about she flew his family out to Las Vegas multiple times in the past. That becomes quite important later on. Las Vegas is part of this whole story. Okay, so that's just my first folder. I've got a lot of folders to go. I'm going to continue, but let me just pause for a second and I'll come back in a second.